Because of what I do here on my YouTube channel, talking about creating different tones, especially with our Line 6 Helix, I get loads of questions from folks that kind of give me an insight into how a lot of people who are using their Helix think about things and how maybe they view certain features of the Helix or certain effects blocks. Now, because of this, I've been able to come to the realization that there's certain effects blocks that sometimes, not everybody, obviously, but a lot of people maybe don't really understand how they work. And today I'm going to be talking about the almighty compressor. Now, this is a topic I've talked about a lot on my channel in the past. This video is not going to be about what each control does. I've done that to death. I've done many videos about what each control does and how a compressor works, and I'll link to those below. But this one's going to be more just to dispel some of the myths that are out there. Things such as you can never put a compressor after time-based effects like reverb and delay. You shouldn't put a compressor at the end of your chain. Compressors always will do X or always will do Y. Compressors will destroy your tone. The problem with all of these statements is they treat the compressor as if they only have one setting and always do the exact same thing. This couldn't be further from the truth. And once we understand how a compressor works, we realize that it can be used in a vast number of different ways depending on what we're trying to accomplish. So today I'm going to try to keep this very short and concise and just give you a couple extreme examples of what I'm talking about so that you can start to understand that a compressor is not always just for one simple purpose. So without further ado, we're going to head over to Cubase and use Helix Native today. That's why you're seeing the little input and output meters on what a lot of folks always seem to ask me is, why does HX Edit have the input and output meters? This is Helix Native. I'm using this for a reason so that we can see the peak reduction meter of the compressor up on the screen, which is going to be a very important part of today's discussion. So without further ado, let's dive over to Cubase and Helix Native. All right, so here we are over in Helix Native. You'll notice I have a very simple little preset set up, and I'll take you through this really quick. It's the Moon Norm amp into the 412 Moon T75 cab, which is one of the new cabs we received in firmware 3.5. These are the settings I was using. And I've also, for very specific reasons, put a transistor tape delay and a dynamic room reverb on here, because one of the things that I hear a lot of people say is you should never use compressors after time-based effects. Now, this is true and it's also false at the same time. Really, as I mentioned before, it depends on how we have our compressor set up, and I hope I can illustrate that for you today. So I have three snapshots set up. I have no comp, I have deluxe heavy, and I have Deluxe Light. Now you might be wondering why I'm calling that Deluxe Heavy and Deluxe Light. If we go over to our compressor, I've chosen a Deluxe compressor. A lot of folks will know that I use an LA Studio comp at the end of my chain a lot, but I thought for this video, the Deluxe is going to be easier to illustrate what I wanted to illustrate because it has much more control. The LA Studio comp is much more set as far as its attack and release, and we have minimal control over those parameters. So it's going to be a lot easier to demonstrate what I want to demonstrate today. So no comp is just this sound here. And I'm using my Vigier GV Wood with P90 pickups in it. Love this guitar, beautiful guitar, great tone out of it. Now, Deluxe Heavy is going to be engaging this compressor. You'll notice on no comp, it was just turned off. So all we were hearing was the amp, delay, and reverb. Deluxe Heavy is going to be very extreme settings on the compressor, as we can see. Threshold of minus 37.1 dB, ratio of 20:1, attack 1 millisecond, release 200 milliseconds, mix at 100%, and the makeup gain or level is going to be plus 20 dB to make up for the fact we have loads of compression on this. And you'll notice the gain reduction meter. Look at how much gain reduction we have here. Right up around 20 dB, therefore the 20 dB of makeup gain. Now, when we go to Deluxe Light, you'll notice all of these parameters change. I go down to a threshold of minus 14.5, ratio of 2:1, attack and release stay the same, 1 millisecond and 200 milliseconds respectively, and just 1 dB of makeup gain, because you'll notice now when the peak reduction, when I hit hard, I'm only getting somewhere in the ballpark of a dB to a dB and a half of gain reduction. It's hard to know exactly because the meter here is at 6, but I'm guessing this is around 3, And I'm getting about a dB of gain reduction there. I've also leveled these sounds so they all are roughly, or as close as I could get, to the same volume. That's going to be extremely important to compare this. One big problem with people using compressors is they will sometimes put a compressor on and think it's doing something, but it's not even set so that the threshold is kicking in. And they're not actually getting anything out of that compressor. Turning it on or off isn't actually affecting the sound, but maybe the level is set by default, and I think by default this comes up at plus 7 dB. So what it will do is when we engage it, it gives us a volume boost, and we go, oh great, listen to how great that compressor is. But it's not actually compressing. If I was to come to my Deluxe Lite here and just take this, we'll remember our setting of minus 14.5. If I take this up here to minus 5.1 and hit the strings as hard as I can, you'll notice we no longer actually have any gain reduction. That compressor was doing nothing but boosting the volume by the 1 dB of makeup gain I have. So we could sit there and think, oh, this is wonderful. This is adding so much to my sound. And all that's happening is it's getting louder. So that's something that's very important to keep in mind. I bring it down to this threshold of minus 14.5. And now we see that that compressor digs in just a little bit with this attack time. So it cuts off some of only the hardest hits that I make. You notice when I hit very quietly, it doesn't even do anything. It's just not even engaging. So that's what I'm looking for this light setting. So in a lot of my presets, and I'm not using the Deluxe comp, but I'm using the Ally Studio comp, people go, you should never put it after the effects because it's going to destroy your reverb and delays. And yes, that is possibly true if used incorrectly, but in the way that I use it, just barely kissing the sound, shall we say, it actually really does very little to affect the delay and reverb, but just acts more as a glue for the entire tone, and that's why I use it. So let's start off by kind of comparing these. We'll go with the no comp sound. Now, if I hit a chord and stop, we hear that the delay and the reverb have a certain behavior, as we would expect them to sound, based off of the settings we have on them. Now, if I turn on the Deluxe Heavy compression, let's listen now, and what you're going to hear is when I hit that initial chord, the compressor is going to clamp down very quickly because I have my attack at 1 millisecond and squash that initial sound. When I let that chord go, the compressor is going to release, and then you're going to hear kind of what they call a pumping and breathing kind of an effect, where all of a sudden the delay and reverb jump out at us because we've compressed that initial attack of my chord, and then the compressor releases and lets the volume of the reverb and delay jump up. Now, this is what folks are talking about when saying we shouldn't use a compressor after delay and reverb. And in this case, I would agree 100% if we're using the compressor in this manner. Sounds like this. You hear a very compressed initial hit, and then you hear the compressor release, and you can see when the meters go back down that delay and reverb jump up. Listen to the difference with no comp. Our initial hit is louder, and then we have a more subtle reverb and delay. Right? So yeah, definitely if I'm playing with this tone, you can hear it's not very pleasant. We're getting this pumping and breathing sound versus if I didn't have the compressor on. Again. We hear that initial attack squash of the attack of my note, and then you hear this reverb and delay kind of breathe. It pumps down, then breathes back up. So not what we want. Now, how does that compare to this light compression? So here again is no compressor. But what if I just wanted to glue things together and have a little bit of peak control? I'll put the deluxe light on now. You'll hear that the delay and comp really don't get affected in a huge manner. Obviously, there's some effect to them, but it's not in an overt way that is going to really jump out at us and destroy our sound. Here's the deluxe light and no comp. Back to the deluxe heavy. So what a difference. If I put the deluxe light on, compared to no comp. And back to the ridiculous deluxe heavy. Really does affect our delay and reverb in a terrible way. But what I'm trying to illustrate here is that a compressor is not always going to do exactly the same thing and have the same effect on our tone. It's really going to depend on how we set it. And I hope that that really brings a little bit of clarity to this discussion. So there you have it. What I was trying to do here is just give a little bit of, like I said, clarity to this discussion and really try to maybe help educate some folks who seem to think that a compressor is a compressor is a compressor. Now, obviously, we have different compressor blocks in the Helix. Some have a lot of control, like the Deluxe. Some have very little control, like maybe the LA Studio Comp or some of the other pedal-based, guitar pedal-based compressors where there's maybe just one or two controls. Some of those compressors are only going to be good for specific things because of the settings they have. Maybe they're going to be too heavy-handed for certain situations. Now, we could place a compressor at the beginning of our chain, really trying to squash down the tone to get some maybe cool funk sounds. That's a completely different thing, and it's perfectly acceptable to use them in that way if that's what we're trying to accomplish. But to always make these blanket statements about a compressor that you can't do this with it, you can do this with it, is really not accurate because we do have a lot of control over what we can do with certain compressors. And once we understand how to dial them in, we can use them in a lot of different ways. And much like I use it at the end of my signal chain, where I'm just gluing things together and not using it in a heavy-handed way. So I hope that that opens folks' eyes about how we can use a compressor, and I hope it helps you to maybe go back, revisit some of your tones, and maybe tweak a compressor in a way that's going to make your tones even better. Now, I will link below to some of my other videos that go more in depth about what each control does, and hopefully those videos in conjunction with this one can help you to get the most out of your Helix and your presets and your use of compressors. So thank you guys so much for tuning in. I hope this video was helpful. Please like it, and please share it with anybody who you think would get some use out of watching it. Also, please subscribe to the channel, hit the little bell notification to get notified when I put new content out. I'll be back really soon with some more. Thank you guys again so much for tuning in. Ciao for now.